National Electrical Code, referred to as the NEC, does not explicitly state specific dimensions for a working platform designed to elevate flow height to comply with the 6.7-foot breaker height regulation. However, the NEC includes several general stipulations that apply to any working platform employed for electrical installations. Section 110.26 of the NEC mandates that all electrical installations must be safeguarded against physical damage. This implies that the working platform must be sturdy and robust enough to support the weight of an electrician and their tools, as well as withstand any other potential physical stresses. Section 110.26b of the NEC dictates that all electrical installations must be readily accessible. This signifies that the working platform must not obstruct access to the electrical panel or other equipment. It should allow the electrician to easily reach the panel for maintenance, repairs, or inspections. Section 110.26c of the NEC stipulates that all electrical installations must be situated in a location where they are not susceptible to excessive physical damage. This suggests that the working platform should be positioned away from areas where it could be struck by vehicles, equipment, or other objects. It should also be protected from exposure to moisture, chemicals, or other elements that could cause it to deteriorate. These overarching requirements might be interpreted as supporting an inspector's demand for a working platform with minimum dimensions of 36 inches in depth and 30 inches in width. A platform of this size would furnish ample space for an electrician to operate securely and without the risk of physical harm. It would also guarantee that the electrician has adequate room to maneuver and reach all parts of the electrical panel. Regarding the inspector's insistence on the platform's permanence, this aspect is also not explicitly addressed within the NEC. Nevertheless, it is justifiable to construe the general safety requirement as encompassing a necessity for permanence. A temporary platform could be easily displaced or removed, potentially creating a hazard for an electrician working on the panel. A permanent platform, on the other hand, would remain firmly in place, providing a stable and secure working surface. Ultimately, the inspector's interpretation of the code holds sway. If the inspector deems that a working platform is essential to adhere to the 6.7-foot breaker height rule, then the inspector possesses the authority to mandate one. It is crucial to engage in open communication with the inspector to comprehend their rationale and to ensure that the platform fulfills all applicable requirements. While the NEC might not prescribe specific dimensions for working platforms, the general safety and accessibility requirements outlined in sections 110.26a, 110.26b, and 110.26c can be interpreted to justify the inspector's stipulations. These requirements are intended to safeguard electricians and ensure that they have a secure and accessible working environment. In the context of electrical installations, the concept of working space is crucial for ensuring safety and accessibility. The NEC provides detailed guidelines on the required working space around electrical equipment, including panel boards, switchboards, and other similar devices. These requirements are designed to protect electricians and other qualified personnel from electrical hazards while they are performing installation, maintenance, or repair work. The NEC working space requirements are typically defined in terms of three dimensions: firstly, depth, secondly, width, and thirdly, height. The depth of the working space is the distance from the front of the electrical equipment to the nearest obstruction. The width of the working space is the horizontal distance parallel to the front of the equipment. The height of the working space is the vertical distance from the floor or platform to the top of the equipment or any overhead obstructions. The specific dimensions of the required working space vary depending on several factors, including firstly, the voltage of the equipment, secondly, the available access points, and thirdly, the presence of any exposed live parts. Higher voltage equipment generally requires more working space than low voltage equipment. Similarly, equipment with multiple access points may require more working space than equipment with a single access point. The presence of exposed live parts also increases the required working space to provide additional protection against electrical shock. The NEC specifies minimum working space clearances in tables, such as Table 110.26a on which provides clearances for various voltage levels and conditions. These clearances are intended to provide sufficient space for electricians to safely work on the equipment without coming into contact with energized parts. It is important to note that these are minimum requirements, and in some cases additional working space may be necessary to ensure safety and accessibility. In addition to the dimensional requirements, the NEC also addresses other aspects of working space such as illumination and access. Section 110.26d requires that working spaces be adequately illuminated to allow for safe and effective work. The illumination level should be sufficient to clearly see all parts of the equipment and the surrounding area. Section 110.26e requires that working spaces have clear and unobstructed access. This means that there should be no obstacles, such as stored materials or equipment, that could impede access to the electrical equipment. The access path should be wide enough to allow the electricians to easily carry tools and equipment into the working space. In some cases, it may be necessary to provide a dedicated entrance or doorway to the working space to ensure adequate access. The NEC also addresses the issue of dedicated equipment space in Section 110.26f. This section requires that electrical equipment be installed in a dedicated space that is not used for storage or other non-electrical purposes. The dedicated equipment space should be large enough to accommodate the equipment and any necessary working space. This requirement is intended to prevent the equipment from being damaged or obstructed by other objects. When evaluating the working space around electrical equipment, it is important to consider all of the applicable NEC requirements. This includes the dimensional requirements as well as the requirements for illumination, access, and dedicated equipment space. By following these guidelines, you can ensure that the working space is safe, accessible, and compliant with the NEC. In addition to the NEC requirements, it is also important to follow any applicable local codes or regulations. Some jurisdictions may have additional requirements for working space that are more stringent than the NEC requirements. It is always best to check with the local authorities to determine the specific requirements for your area. When designing or installing electrical equipment, it is essential to carefully consider the working space requirements. This will help to ensure that the equipment is safe, accessible, and compliant with all applicable codes and regulations. By paying attention to these details, you can create a safe and efficient working environment for electricians and other qualified personnel. Now let's consider the specific scenario involving the working platform. The inspector's requirement for a permanent platform with dimensions of at least 36 inches deep and 30 inches wide can be justified based on the general principles of safety and accessibility outlined in the NEC. While the NEC does not explicitly state these dimensions, the inspector is using their professional judgment to interpret the code and apply it to the specific situation. The 36-inch depth requirement likely stems from the need to provide adequate working space in front of the electrical panel. This allows the electrician to stand comfortably and have enough room to maneuver while working on the equipment. The 30-inch width requirement likely ensures that the electrician has sufficient lateral space to move around and access different parts of the panel. The permanence requirement is also based on safety considerations. A temporary platform could be easily moved or removed, which could create a tripping hazard or make it difficult to access the panel. A permanent platform provides a stable and secure working surface that is less likely to be accidentally displaced. While the NEC does not explicitly define what constitutes a permanent platform, it is reasonable to assume that it should be securely attached to the floor or wall in a manner that prevents it from being easily moved or removed. This could be achieved by bolting the platform to the floor, using adhesive to secure it in place, or by building it as an integral part of the structure. In the described scenario, the use of a 2x4 box with a plywood top, nailed to the floor, and secured with Z-Mac nails through plates screwed to the bottom appears to meet the intent of the permanence requirement. The inspector's approval suggests that they were satisfied with the method used to secure the platform and ensure its stability. However, it is important to note that the specific requirements for working platforms may vary depending on the jurisdiction and the specific application. It is always best to consult with the local electrical inspector to determine the applicable requirements for your area. In summary, while the NEC does not provide specific dimensions for working platforms, the general principles of safety and accessibility can be used to justify the inspector's requirements. The 36-inch depth and 30-inch width requirements are likely based on the need to provide adequate working space in front of the electrical panel. The permanence requirement is intended to ensure that the platform is stable and secure. It is always best to consult with the local electrical inspector to determine the applicable requirements for your area. Furthermore, it is important to understand the difference between prescriptive and performance-based codes. Prescriptive codes provide specific requirements that must be met, while performance-based codes set goals that must be achieved, but allow for flexibility in how those goals are met. The NEC is primarily a prescriptive code, but it also includes some performance-based elements. For example, the requirement that electrical installations be safe is a performance-based requirement. It is up to the inspector to determine whether a particular installation meets this requirement, even if it complies with all of the prescriptive requirements in the code. In the case of the working platform, the inspector is using their professional judgment to determine whether the platform is safe and accessible, even though the NEC does not provide specific dimensions for such platforms. This is an example of how performance-based codes can be used to address situations that are not explicitly covered by the prescriptive requirements. When dealing with performance-based codes, it is important to have a clear understanding of the goals that the code is trying to achieve. This will help you to develop solutions that meet the intent of the code, even if they do not comply with all of the prescriptive requirements. It is also important to communicate with the local electrical inspector to ensure that your proposed solution is acceptable. In conclusion, the NEC provides a comprehensive set of requirements for electrical installations, but it is not always possible to anticipate every situation that may arise. In some cases, it is necessary to rely on the general principles of safety and accessibility to interpret the code and apply it to the specific situation. By working with the local electrical inspector and understanding the intent of the code, you can ensure that your electrical installations are safe, compliant, and effective. Remember to always prioritize safety when working with electricity and to consult with a qualified electrician if you have any questions or concerns.